So good morning, Vishesh. Great to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to hearing your wonderful inputs. And if you're ready, we could get started.
Delighted to be here, Sangeeta. Of course, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time out and being, consenting to be part of the show. So, Vishesh, I would like you to focus on the customer aspect of a business. So, customers are key to any business, and businesses can have many different verticals. So, from your wide experience, how can a business manage to build customers for different verticals? And ultimately, the objective is to grow the business. So, what can a business do to grow?
Yeah, so we've never thought of building customers or clients, as we call them, for any one line of business. We try and build customers for the firm. Yes, it does start off as a one-off experience, but you've got to ensure that first one-off experience is a great opportunity for the customer to have a experience that they would like repeated again and again, right? Irrespective of which vertical was serving them. Of course, that depends on what your business is, but that's what, if you look at most startups which look at scaling rapidly, that's the strategy. How can we get a new customer to experience our product the first time? That first experience should be so great that they don't mind paying for it a second time. And the first experience very often is without any charge. And I think so therefore we've never thought of customers for verticals. It's customers for the firm. Great experience. Assess both ways also. I would say, is the customer good fit for you as an enterprise? Every customer is not. In service businesses, does the culture match? Do they respect you? Are you able to add value? You got to ask, all those questions. So, it's not only about adding every customer because an opportunity arose.
Right. Yeah. So I hear you say customer experience is something that's very important. And also what you said is very, very valid to say that, ability to differentiate who's the right customer. But how does one gain this experience, especially like startups or people who are, just getting new to business, and there are also businesses that are like, craving to get more customers. So what would be your take on that?
Well, I think so basically how to add new customers. Yeah, I think it's, the different strategies. Of course, the single biggest thing out there is building your brand, right? You build your brand through consistency of experience, right? Every brand that is a well-known brand, whether it is Apple or Virgin or Grant Thornton, I'd say, are all brands that have that stand for a certain kind of experience. And that's what customers pay that premium for. Customers have many options, but they pay that premium because there's something a brand represents that appeals to them.
Right.
So what is that clarity of your brand promise needs to be absolutely clear. For us, it was always clear it is Indian companies who have global ambitions. From a very early stage, and I was asked this question always, Vishesh, aren't you then saying no to multinationals?
Right.
And my response was, no, we're not. We're only saying our brand in India focuses on Indian companies who want to adopt global standards, want to make global acquisitions, want to think global in their perspective. Many MNCs who operate in India also, the Indian businesses think like that. Right? So it's not necessarily saying no, but you got to, own some territory,
right,
and not hesitate from doing that. You can't be all things to all people.
Right. So building a niche is what I understand from what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Sure.
Your brand, building a niche and then hopefully several niches over time.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Sure. That's nice. Right. So when a business is offering a variety of services, like you said, different niches over a period of time. So is it a good practice to cross-sell, for a business? Because what are some of the best ways to cross-sell to the existing customers? Because, people have this, or rather businesses have the struggle of acquiring new customers. So if they have a set customer base, is it a good thing to cross-sell? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, we actually, I believe, customers hate cross-sell. They feel, it's almost, being used. You're trying to, sell something else versus what they came to. We call it, smart collaboration at Grant Thornton. How do you bring in, different kinds of expertise as a part of that first experience? So if the customer came to you first to, do, let's say, an internal audit, an internal audit can be delivered by an internal audit specialist, but you can also bring in a cyber expert, an IT systems digital expert, a tax expert, indirect tax expert, expert in, government policy and incentives, and holistically, therefore, add value to the client, right? As part of that internal audit.
Right.
That is how you're leveraging all the skills that exist on your side, part of that job, and hopefully by doing some of that work, by giving some of those insights, you will automatically, have other opportunities to help the client grow. If you're helping the client grow, it would automatically result in what, some people would have called cross-sell, but it's just a different perspective. It's always thinking from the customer's perspective versus your perspective. How can I sell second, third, fourth, fifth, jobs?
Right. Lovely. I liked the smart collaboration aspect that you mentioned, right? So the next thing moving on is, like they say, out of sight is out of mind. So what is a good customer retention strategy?
Only are you spending time, making time for your customers, right? Are you, at least in our business, I call it making time outside the engagement delivery. So if you're delivering that internal audit I talked about, is that the only time you see the customer? Or do you also make time for non-engagement conversations, to discuss what's happening in their business, what their business goals are, what their biggest challenges are? And it's really about, those touch points and those ongoing conversations that, one should focus on.
Right. Sure. Got it. Okay. So what should drive the pricing strategy of a business, and what can be a good basis for arriving at an hourly charge out rate, especially for a service business is mostly driven by the hourly rate. So what can be a good way to get there?
Yeah, but pricing is much more of an art than a science. I know accountants like myself, may not like that answer, but pricing is much more an art. And now theoretically, in a professional services business, pricing is a factor of the staff costs, the people costs that go into an engagement, and a multiple of that, usually a 3 to 5 times multiple of the staff costs, which you use to cover overheads and then generate profits, right? For your business. But I think rate, those charge out rates are usually used to establish budgets, which basically help you determine, whether a customer or certain kinds of work in certain areas, does that make money for you or not?
Sure.
It's not something that necessarily is what the market pays. I think there's many factors that come in when you're deciding about what's the right pricing strategy for a particular customer. Strategic importance, the risk, where are you in the stage of development of that offering to the customer. The pricing can't be the same if it's the 100th time you're doing something versus the 10th time you're doing it.
Right. So there's no particular one way of doing, is what I hear you say. It's a mix of a lot of things.
It's that, again, there's no, now that doesn't work like that for a B2C business, like FMCG, right? At the same time, somebody is launching a new shampoo, what the pricing strategy is in the first launch phase when you want people to try out that shampoo could be quite different to when it's a well-established, head and shoulders kind of brand.
Sure. All right. Okay. So what are your thoughts on the adage that customer is king? So in the current day, does adhering to this, does it really contribute to the financial growth of a business?
Yeah, so I agree more with what Mr. Vineet Nair, the legendary CEO of HCL, says. People first, customers second. I'm not saying customers are not important. There's no business without the customer. But eventually, if you take care of your people, those people will take care of the customer. I think that's more true in this, coronavirus pandemic kind of environment than ever before. And how our business is stepping up to take care of their people is what's critical, and they will, then clearly take care of their customers, in my view.
Right. So it's a great thing. So is there any pointers you'd like to share on how to really take care of your people?
I think basically, the beginning, the starting point is: do you genuinely put the safety and well-being of your people first, right? So, again, if I give the context of the pandemic right now, there's a very difficult decision in front of businesses to what extent to call people back to the workplaces, to what extent, allow them to work from home. And again, there's no one answer, it depends on your business. But for example, in our case, I can just share with you, in the NCR region, looking at the capacity in the hospitals right now, the lack of capacity in the hospitals right now, we took a decision last Tuesday to go back to mandatory work from home. Before that, we had an optional work from home. People could still use offices, go to client sites. But we took that decision because that's our responsibility, to society and to our people. That their safety would be compromised because we, would be putting a burden on the healthcare system if we were to keep that optional work from home. Yes, there are client requests for meetings. There are client requests to come in right now. But our business can be handled virtually. Most things that we do can be handled virtually, and that's just one example. On how do you take care of people? I think the other example would be on in terms of compensation. A lot of businesses had cut compensations of people in the uncertain time, which I would say right or wrong. We certainly took the decision that we did not think we needed to do that. In fact, if anything, we wanted to assure our people that there will be no compensation cuts at that, at the pandemic time. That's the last thing they should worry about. I know every business could not have taken that call, and that's perfectly acceptable. But having taken that call, what are they doing now? Having adjusted their other overheads, reduced travel, and hopefully for most of them, the businesses come back. Are they now resetting those compensation cuts, or actually waiting, until the future? And I really feel, those are some of the ways in which you can really put people first. And if you look after your people in that way, they will absolutely look after your customers.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I think especially during these times, people look for empathy and, other more human aspects to get connected, right? Sure. So what can be a winning formula to acquire new customers, especially if a business does not want to spend on advertisement or marketing, because everybody wants, they just consider it as a spend, but it also helps in acquiring new customers. So what can be a good way to balance it out?
Yeah, so we do very little advertising and almost no marketing as a business. Again, that would not be right for an FMCG company, a B2C brand, which would have to do all kinds of above the line and below the line marketing, advertising. At least in our case, we rely on word of mouth. I believe word of mouth and customer referrals is a very, very strong platform that is available, which isn't used enough. In fact, in our case, we use the KPI of would our customers promote us, would they recommend us to others, using the Net Promoter Score, which is a well-known methodology where you ask a customer, would you recommend Grant Thornton? And if you're rated 9 or 10, versus if you're rated 6 or 7, 8 is neutral, 9 or 10 are promoters. So that's how you compute net promoter score, and that's the KPI we measure. I think what most people miss out is actually asking for that recommendation. So when somebody says that we would recommend you, uh, you know, I actually encourage teams, why don't you ask the customer, please do make those connections. Please do introduce us to, a couple of other CFOs, CIOs, in your network, or at least share that story. And I think, most people do it without being asked, and that's great. Nothing stops you from actually asking for that. So I believe, make sure that experience is, so good first time round that the customer, would automatically want to talk about that experience to others. Of course, then give them ways to either ask them directly or tell them, here's, discounted offers. So if you're a, product company, discounted opportunities to give this product to others.
Right.
Please pass on these coupons, kind of thing. And that's what they do, right? Again, going back to my Uber, Ola example, that's what they do to acquire new customers. You get so many to refer a customer and enjoy a free ride.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Word of mouth and referrals are great ways indeed. Sure. So customer related costs, that can be in the form of customer acquisition costs or special discounts. It could be rework costs or resolving customer complaints, lead generation, collection costs, different aspects of costs that are related with the customer function. So how can a business ensure to keep these customer related costs at a minimal and yet ensure that their revenue is growing?
The customer acquisition costs, right?
Yeah. All the customer
costs. Yeah. All the customer related costs. Okay. Yeah. So I don't think there is a silver bullet, Sangeeta. I don't think there is, again, one answer how you can keep, customer related costs low. The most important thing is, that good fit between the customer and the organization. And that good fit, again, is around determining what the exact needs of the customer are, what the preferences of the customer are, right? And understanding that well, and then continuing to focus on that and delivering that and ensuring at the end of the engagement, you again understand from the customer, did they get, what was promised? Did they get what they were looking for? A lot of times, I can tell you, even as a customer myself, my own expectations of what I'm looking for isn't clear, unless I'm buying like a clear product.
Sure.
But in services, I'm quite dissatisfied when I'm a buyer of services, and the reason for that is myself, not the service provider often.
True.
And I would really appreciate if a service provider was to understand from me what your expectations are of timeline, of pricing, when you should be billed, of when you should be asked if you're happy or not, so that it can be tailored to me versus a generic one size fits all within those broad parameters, right, of what counts as experience.
Right. So you're saying it's a good thing to reach out to customer, understand what they really want, and customize your product or service to that, and that would help keep the customer costs at a minimum.
Absolutely. So I said, even for product companies, you can customize the experience on how the product is delivered.
Right.
Certainly for service companies who don't have a product, it's much harder. But even for product companies, how is that product consumed by the customer?
Right? Sure. Correct. All right.
I mean, why did Apple focus on, making their product packaged the way they do? They wanted, Steve Jobs says in his book, I wanted every Apple product to the customer to feel like a gift to themselves. So when they opened the product, they'd have that, delight of receiving a gift, right?
Yes.
And that's why it needs to look like that.
Right.
Today, a lot of people will say, yes, it's waste of packaging. It's not very, environment conscious and those sort of things. Most of it is maybe recycled, material. But there's a reason behind that. That's why Apple is $1 trillion company, today, because they managed to give that consistent experience. It's not the very best, technologically the very best device, right? It's absolutely not. There are better, technologies out there, but the way they've managed to focus on their brand promise, have it absolutely clear. They have loyal customers who find it hard to step out of that ecosystem.
That's true. Yeah, very right. Yes. what are the best practices for a business to adopt a robust system for collections? Because, cash is king, cash is like oxygen for any business, and yet a lot of businesses struggle with cash. So is there like a best practice to ensure that the collections happen on time?
I think the best practice is again to have a customer level credit limit established, based on whatever's appropriate. So the second thing would be an expectation on when the customer should pay. And again, every customer may not have the same expectation of when they could pay. The third thing I would say is, of course, an appropriate, follow-up mechanism, behind that. The fourth thing would be, stop serving if, those things are breached,
right,
until, that's rectified. Or the fifth thing, document that there is something owed by the customer and when they expect to pay. That documentation and admittance of liability that they've received services or goods is necessary if for whatever reason in the future you had to go about recovering that through legal means. So those are the 5 things I would say a customer could look at.
Sure.
Sorry, a company could look at to
Right.
ensure they don't get into issues on payment.
Right, right. So in fact, the MSME Act, which is there for these micro, small, medium enterprises, I think it says that they have to be paid within 45 days, but in reality, I mean, it doesn't really happen. So is there a way out for these MSME businesses in cases like this when they do not get paid on time? Is there any way out for them to manage?
I'm not sure, because that's a statutory requirement, and therefore if a company is not paying MSMEs within that time period, it actually gets mentioned in their annual report, and therefore I think the only way is to again bring it up with the customer and if required give them a copy of the statute. But
Right.
most good companies follow those norms.
Right. So would you advise these guys to take the legal route?
Absolutely, why not? I think in some ways, and I mean, I would think that would be the exception. So if you're not getting paid for a majority of your customers, then you've got to think about your own business and what you're supplying. But if it's the one-off case, of course you should take the legal route in order to recover. But before taking the legal route, as I said earlier, there are some steps you can take. Do you have the documentation that the customers received, the service and accepted that? Do you have documentation confirming that the customer, in the past said that they would pay, and whenever, and then they may have missed the payment. Some of those things would help your legal case.
Right.
Without that, going to court is still an option, but the time it would take to succeed, the chance of success may be much lower.
Sure. Okay, all right. So what would be your advice for businesses to grow their profits? These are challenging times as well, and every business wants to grow further, get more profits. So what would be your advice to businesses in general?
Yeah. So I'll give a general answer. But of course, all businesses have taken the steps, as I said earlier, on containing their costs, right? Whether it's resetting their rentals, giving up office spaces, relooking at discretionary costs like travel and meetings, and replacing those with virtual. Even looking at digitizing things that were labor intensive, or just improving processes. Businesses have done that. If they haven't, they ought to continue to do that. It's not a one-off thing. At the same time, they ought to also look at making investments for the future. I know it would probably sound a bit counterintuitive, but businesses don't get into trouble during a recession. Businesses get into trouble coming out of a recession. And the businesses that do get into trouble coming out of a recession are ones where You are not, making the investments during the recession to make use of the opportunity when the market turns. And therefore, if you want to maintain your profitability, nobody, should be looking at weekly, daily, monthly profitability. You look at it over a hopefully medium to long term period, period. And over that period, the best way is to continue to make investments and do so even more aggressively during a recession.
Right. Sure. Sure. I'd also like to ask you, what would be your advice again, on corporate governance, ethics, integrity, and, because these are very crucial, and it sometimes gets to become a gray area for businesses, and then, they just tend to flip to the other side just when they're focusing on the business growth. So any tips there on how they can ensure they are a lot more focused on corporate governance and integrity and ethics?
Yeah, so I think there is, probably three sizes you've got to, break businesses down into. The small and startup, the mid-sized entrepreneur family business, and the large business, however it may be held. And I think the corporate governance, question on what's appropriate for each of those three, sizes, scales, stages is different. There isn't a one size fits all. So there's no point having a, big board of governors with, big name individuals, to lend, their names, but never show up for a small SME startup. It's absolutely inappropriate. It would slow the business down. It would, you've got to first make the business successful. At the same time, for that small and mid-sized company, doing the right thing ought to always be front and center, right? Whether there is that, board governance or not. I think, for a mid-sized company, the most important thing, in my view, and usually it's entrepreneurs or, so it could be 2 or 3 entrepreneurs who are working together. It could be 2 or 3 generations of a family who are working together. What is their understanding inter se? How is that documented, whether in a family constitution or a good shareholders agreement or both, is absolutely critical, because people have differences of opinion, and you don't want those differences of opinion to come into, the business and start affecting the business, right? So if that happens, what's the way for people to amicably resolve those differences, exit, etc., etc. We see people miss, putting those sort of, things in place. And of course, for a large business, the answer is, the appropriate segregation between ownership and management, the appropriate, segregation between executive directors and independents, on key decisions. And the most important thing is culture and tone at the top, right? Across those 3 stages, even when you're a small business, what is the tone at the top from the entrepreneur around doing the right thing? That's the common, thread that weaves across the 3 stages. The tone at the top and the culture. Is it genuinely about doing the right thing or not?
Yes. And anything you would like to say on putting the customer first? How can they put the customer? I mean, of course, you said people first, but customers are also important, like you said. So how can they ensure that customers come first? I mean, come
I think
second.
I think customers still have to come first in their own way. I think, as I said, internally you've got to, your priority has to be, as a leader, as a CEO, at least in the service business, to ensure that, your people are looked after in a way that nobody else can look after them. If you do that, they will be oriented towards the customers. I think how you could put the customer first always, how the people and teams can put customer first, is to understand each customer, their specific needs, tailor the offering to that customer within the broad framework of those same pillars, of the, pricing, the billing, the experience they're looking for, how will they know they're happy. So I think tailor that experience to each customer versus, a one size fits all. I think, tailor the pricing to each customer versus a one size fits all. I don't know how many people try, keep focusing on how much discount to give a customer. This customer doesn't pay, this customer wants a discount always, this customer, pays. But why don't you focus on when the customer pays? Ask for money in advance, right? Use your cost of capital differential between you and the customer's cost of capital. If it's a big company, they would have a very low cost of capital compared to you as a a smaller, mid-sized company. Your cost of capital will be much higher. If they pay you in advance, you're already probably sitting on a 15% better return than you would otherwise.
True. Yes. Yes. I think that was very, very useful. Yes, I'm sure the viewers must be getting very excited hearing this. So thank you so much, Vishesh, for taking the time out and sharing some lovely insights on the customer perspective. It was great to have you and hope to catch up with you soon.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta.